Hello YouTubers and welcome to my channel. So where can you find a knight, a pyramid, a pond with an island with a beautiful view, and baseball royalty? Well, right here in Chicago, Illinois at Graceland Cemetery. If you're planning to make a trip to Chicago just to see the sights such as the Willis Tower, the Mag Mile, the Bean, well, I'm sure that a cemetery may not be high on your list of places to see. But today's excursion is to Graceland Cemetery, and it's no average cemetery. Not only is it a National Historical Landmark with its 121 acres, but it's a certified arboretum of more than 2,000 trees. But it's also a who's who of famous Chicagoans, whose names have become synonymous with Chicago history as well as early U.S. history. Most of them made sure to leave a lasting legacy during life and beyond. In fact, Graceland Cemetery is loaded with some of the most interesting and elaborate grave sites that you'll find in the Chicagoland area and beyond. So where is Graceland Cemetery? Well, it's on the north side of Chicago in the Uptown neighborhood, several blocks northwest of Wrigley Field, home of the Chicago Cubs baseball team, along Clark Street and Irving Park Road. So let's start with a little history. Graceland Cemetery was established in 1860, and during that time, the largest cemetery in Chicago was known as City Cemetery, which was located near Lake Michigan and North Avenue on the grounds of what's today Chicago's Lincoln Park Zoo. Some 20,000 graves were located in City Cemetery. It was Chicago's only public graveyard from 1843 until 1859, until Chicago residents fell victim to a cholera outbreak, which was the result of the dead being buried too close to Lake Michigan, as well as sewage that was being pumped out to Lake Michigan, which was Chicago's main source of drinking water at the time. And cholera is spread through contaminated drinking water. Therefore, it became necessary to relocate the dead further away from Lake Michigan. Some 2,000 remains were relocated and interred there. It also became a popular choice as a site for prominent Chicagoans, with many opting to pre-erect burial monuments at the cemetery for their future burials. So let's dig into some of the notable grave sites you'll find at Graceland, such as William Kimball. William Wallace Kimball founded the Kimball Piano Company in 1857 as a piano dealer. But the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 destroyed the Crosby Opera House where his store was located. Kimball and his associates were able to save only 7 grand pianos from the flames. So he began producing pianos in 1888 and became one of the largest piano manufacturers of the time. And just behind the Kimball tomb is a smaller monument to a person who dreamed big. So how big? Well, Louis Sullivan, the famed architect, who was known as the father of skyscrapers. His use of steel framing meant buildings could be made taller, slimmer, and quicker. America's big city skylines were forever changed. With the use of his signature half arches around entrances and the top of window frames, he also designed intricate shaped ironwork, such as the famous downtown Chicago Carson Peary Scott store on State Street, which has clock canopy entrances with beautiful writhing green ironwork. Mr. Cub and Baseball Hall of Famer Ernie Banks, the legendary Cubs first baseman, was also the first black baseball player for the Chicago Cubs. He also served as an ambassador for the Cubs franchise. The legend passed away in 2015, just blocks away from where he played baseball. And just across the pond is his crosstown rival, Mr. White Sox, Baseball Hall of Famer, White Sox legend Minnie Minoso. We'll get to him in a bit. Graceland also is a who's who collection of famed architects. This is the monument for Bruce Goff. A 1951 Life magazine article stated that Goff was one of the few architects that Frank Lloyd Wright considered creative. He scorned houses that he felt were boxes with little holes. Here we're approaching Marshall Field's. His namesake store was located at the corner of State and Washington since the late 1800s until it was renamed Macy's when it was bought out by the company in 2006. Marshall and his wife and family are buried here, including his sons and grandsons, who several were also named Marshall Field. The cemetery has always been a tourist attraction, a place to have picnics, go for a run, or ride a bike through. And of course, Graceland has many a ghost legend, and there are several local walking tours and ghost tours available. And also, my good friends Pat and Rebecca at Ghostly Podcast have an episode that covers the legendary haunts of Graceland Cemetery. It's a very entertaining episode, as are all of the Ghostly Podcast episodes. I highly recommend checking them out. I'll post a link to the episode below. We talked about Louis Sullivan earlier when we saw his monument. Well, now you get to see some of his work. This is the Henry Harrison Getty and Carrie Eliza Getty Tomb. It was designed by Sullivan, and it showcases some of the work that I had talked about. His beautiful half arches and some of the ornate steel and ironwork that's to be found in a lot of his work. And now, onto one of the most beautiful places in Graceland, Burnham Island. Daniel Burnham designed much of Chicago's lakefront and the layout for the 1893 Columbian Exposition's World's Fair. He also designed the famous Flatiron Building on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. He was given his very own beautiful island here at Graceland, a place to sit and reflect and enjoy the beauty. It's the perfect place of rest for a person who enjoyed scenic beauty and gave Chicago his Burnham Plan, which designates parkland along the lakefront that does not allow construction of buildings along the shorelines, so the general public can forever enjoy the shores of Lake Michigan, which meant that there were no houses or large buildings being built along the shoreline, and there could be no rail yards, but there could be bike paths. Thank you, Mr. Burnham. I couldn't have picked a better day to come here in the fall. The sun was shining, the leaves were at the perfect balance of color, and it just looked amazing. Everywhere you looked, it smelled fantastic, and it had to be about 70 degrees. And as you can see, there are a lot of people. Throughout the entire video, you'll notice there are people everywhere. Here's a kid on a scooter. There are other people on bikes. There are just families playing together. It's a great place to gather. But it is an amazing place for beauty. An amazing place to appreciate. All of these people that are buried here contributed to what we see here today. It truly is the gift that keeps on giving. We had talked about Mr. Cub Baseball Hall of Famer Ernie Banks earlier, and I mentioned that his crosstown rival was buried directly across the pond. Well, here he is, Minnie Minoso. He's also in the Hall of Fame, and the White Sox legend was known as the Cuban Comet. He was the left fielder and the first Afro-Latino to play for the White Sox. Here's the tomb of Henry Hamilton Honore. The Honore tomb is in the French Gothic style, was designed by McKim, Mead & White. Honore came to Chicago from Kentucky in 1855, and he made his fortune in real estate. Honore's daughter, Bertha, married Potter Palmer in 1871. She's actually buried directly across the road from him. Potter Palmer was responsible for much of the development of State Street, and he started a dry goods store in the 1850s in a partnership with a 21-year-old named Marshall Fields. Fields went on to buy out his partners, which is why it became the Marshall Fields store. His wife Bertha was known as the Queen of High Society. She liked to host lavish parties at their famed home known as the Castle that was located along North Lakeshore Drive. We also get to thank her for the creation of the brownie, which was a treat that she loved to serve to her guests. Her husband Potter built the famed Palmer House Hotel in downtown Chicago, which is still in existence today. And he had quite a racket. You see, trains that would go coast to coast had to stop in Chicago, so passengers had to disembark, and they usually stayed overnight at the hotel and shopped at his stores. And speaking of trains, this is George Pullman's grave. George built trains and luxury trains and tried to create a modern utopia by creating Chicago's Pullman neighborhood and displaying to the world how a community can exist with an employer-owned town. It did not turn out well for him. Labor strikes and angry employee uprising destroyed his plans for a perfect town, and when he died, he was buried at night in a lead-lined coffin within a reinforced steel and concrete vault to prevent his body from being dug up and desecrated by labor activists. Here's the grave of William Hulbert. He was the founder of the National League of American Baseball. This is the famous Inez Clark statue. It also has a famous legend attached to it. According to legend, Inez was a 6-year-old girl who died from a lightning strike during a picnic with her parents. Some say that the statue disappears during thunderstorms because Inez is afraid. Others say that Inez's ghost haunts the cemetery and can be seen by other children. And other people believe that Inez Clark didn't even exist. Well, that brings us to the end of our video. I might add there may be a part 2 to this one day, as there are other guests that are buried here that I didn't have time to cover. But I'd like to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Thank you.